sirs. Hello, gentlemen. Andrew, it's nice to see you. We've brought a new friend to the Association Transformation family today.
We do indeed, and it's such a pleasure. It really is.
Well,
I'm delighted.
and this is so timely. I know we talk about branding in kind of this generic sense, but several of my clients are rebranding right now, having to
Hmm.
rethink some of the words and the core value statements and just some of these primary identifiers are really under the microscope these days. So I'm so excited to have Tom Silva with us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Tom. I don't know where in the world you are, but principal of Silva Brand, we're excited to have you with us on Association Transformation.
Well, thank you both for having me, Andrew, Lisa. It's such a pleasure to be here. I've heard the podcast and always have a lot of fun with it. But yeah, we're in downtown Chicago, and you'll notice my general optimism today because it's 80 degrees outside after a
There
very
you
frosty
go.
winter. So it's good to be here.
There you go. Well, and as Andrew knows, the Bears have started their mandatory off-season workouts, so I'm sure
Indeed,
there's lots of excitement in the city.
indeed, yes. And well, it's always lovely to meet someone else from Chicago because then there's another person I can drag along to a Bears game with me eventually. So,
Oh, there you go.
That's right. That's
Gladly,
right.
yes.
So, Tom, you have a new book out, a new ebook that I hear you're going to make available for free to download to everyone. That was the secret, I was told. But the challenge of association branding. I have so many questions about this.
mm.
Why is association branding than anyone else's branding? And why is this a challenge now more than before, or has it always been a challenge? Go.
Yeah, it's kind of mystifying because if you think about the association sector, and I think, both of you are experts in this field, so I mean, some of the numbers, 60,000 associations in the US alone, serving over 100 million people. Enormous industry by any measure, and yet the fundamentals of the industry and the sector make it very difficult to effectively brand.
Why? Why? That doesn't make any sense. We have
Yeah.
almost captive audiences.
Yes, indeed. And I think part of it is a couple of things that I cite. The first is the volunteer governance structure makes it really challenging. Um,
Oh, here we go. You
yep,
just opened that can of worms, Tom. You opened the
yeah,
can of worms.
I can feel your pain. Yeah, it's exactly the same problem that you all deal with literally any kind of change in the association world. You have these committees, you have these boards, you have these chapter leaders, and I think they're all well-meaning. I really do, and they give a lot of volunteer time to do the work that needs to be done. However, as you know, all of these boards and all of these different, bodies are composed of an equal mix of newbies and lifers. These people who are
Mm.
legacy, these people who are, part of the future, multi-generational oftentimes. What it leads to is a lot of inertia and a lot of information. There's a huge information gap. So you have boards that are making decisions and oftentimes about very esoteric aspects of marketing. And I've chatted with some of these boards. So for example, I'll give you a quick illustration of this. So I had an association that reached out and asked me to look at their website, which the board had approved. One of the board members, really almost by caveat, had approved the spend for this website and said, just take a look. I looked at it and I realized they were charged, in the multiple six figures for a website that was built on a template and wasn't mobile optimized. So if you can imagine such a thing, and of course I
Mm.
looked at it and then I look at what they spent and I thought, you just way overspent this, and there was no proper review of what the scope of the assignment was. There wasn't proper, controls in place, and so the ROI on that spend is really weak. And of course, the reason you're doing that, the reason you have that is these board members often, they're specialists in their field. So you've all worked with boards that may be oncologists. They may be building product manufacturers. They may be, nurse practitioners or jewelers, whatever it is. They're not marketing people. Neither, neither should you expect them to have that kind of
Mhm.
knowledge, but that creates a real issue. And so the governance structure is the first one I would cite. Yeah, Lisa.
So, what I hear you saying is that it's not the board's jurisdiction nor their expertise to manage or approve a marketing plan or a website. So,
Well,
asking for their investment or their endorsement of a committee or the staff to undertake these things is really the lane they should be in.
I think that's right. Now, where I think the board adds an enormous amount of value is making sure that that spend is aligned with the strategic vision of the organization.
Yeah, yeah,
mhm,
yeah.
For example, to
mhm.
be able to ask, like, what would a mobile first experience give our association? Well, does it align with the fact that, a good part of our membership is in areas that aren't served by a chapter? Good example. Are we growing internationally? And so we're not able to serve membership through conference or programming and things like that. And so a digital first platform makes perfect sense. That strategic alignment is really important. The board is there to do, I think, that important work. But the actual execution and figuring out the solutions, those have to be done by people who with the expertise in those fields.
When's that ever stopped a good board from getting involved, though? Um,
How dare you? How dare
well,
you?
I think though it's I think what Tom's highlighting is a significant issue that actually transcends a lot of different aspects of an association's or membership bodies activities. It's not, I mean, the marketing, the branding piece is one significant example, and it's one that can actually do last such lasting damage because it's such a public facing piece of work as well. It's the not just the website, the whole piece, how you access as a member, how you access your association, your trade body, your membership entity, how you access it, how you engage with it is now, the quarter mark of the 21st century. It's such a critical, pivotal part of your experience of membership, how you perceive it, how you see it, how you experience it, and yet it continues to be an area that people think, well, oh, I know how to use the internet. I know how to use a website. Therefore, I know how to brand something. And it seems to be this self-perpetuating crises. And I think it leads to, and I think it's led to, arguably, a crisis of identity, or it's certainly fed an identity crisis within the membership sector. Lise, sorry.
So, this is a challenge that I have when we talk about marketing, branding, websites. I think we're
Mm,
crossing the
hmm.
streams a lot. And I just want to take a step back. I'm not a marketer, I'm not a tech person. What is, to me, a branding and a brand strategy is different than marketing and different
Yeah.
than a website.
Yeah,
So,
it's a
what's the
really
purpose of the brand? Who's your target audience? What should a brand accomplish?
so I'm going to quote, but you guys might remember Peter Drucker,
Yeah.
who sort of wrote management theory back in the day. Peter Drucker, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit by saying, brand is the entire business seen from the point of view of the customer. Our version of that is brand is the story your customers tell about you, because ultimately that's all that matters.
Hmm.
So that the customer will ultimately tell the story of the association, the member will. And the things they'll remember may not be functional needs. They may not have anything to do with all the information or the networking that they did. It may be some interaction or some experience that they had, which is so personal. And all of us have had, experiences, I think, of people that tear up sometimes when they talk about something they experienced at an association event or whatever it is. So the brand is ultimately the story they tell, the customers tell.
Okay.
Marketing is the story you tell. That's the only story the association can control. And that's really your positioning in the marketplace. And that has two aspects to it. It's differentiation. How are you different from all the other associations? And the second part is relevance. Relevance is how do you solve your customers' core needs?
Mhm.
So you may provide it, you may have a wonderfully differentiated association, but guess what? If it has no relevance to what they're actually looking for, if
Mm,
there's no product market fit, your association isn't going to work.
mm,
And so you create that positioning story, you put it out in the marketplace, the customer receives it, and they're the ones that ultimately control the brand story. So does that make sense, Elisa?
It
Yeah, no, I like that a lot, where there's one side of it that's that experiential and it's holistic from someone else's view. And then there's what you put out and what you say you are and what you say you do and why. And I think of a website just as a tactic, just as a channel, but
Exactly.
so often that's what people get obsessed about is the outward facing stuff, the
Hmm.
stuff that they
Yep.
spend the money on, the stuff that they have to update, the stuff that gets likes or shares or whatever. And that's not really what we're talking about.
but it's easy.
Exactly.
But it's relatively easy because it's
Which
understandable,
is
it's
why they
tangible,
gravitate
which is
towards
why they
it. Yeah.
gravitate toward it. They do it because it's the immediacy of a website, of a brochure, of a trifold. It's the immediacy of it. Well, I understand that, so I'm going to throw myself into the devil of the detail of that. Whereas actually challenging oneself to, or challenging yourselves to actually, is the experience of this association valuable? That's a really that's a challenge. That's
That
a
hits
difficult
close.
question,
That
and it
hits close to
yeah,
home. Yeah.
yeah. You might
I
not like
really
what you got to hear. Yeah.
I really love the fact, Andrew, you've mentioned the word experience about 7 times so far because the word experience is the operative word. It may be the operating system of what associations will be, both now and in the future. We are doing so much work around some of the research that we do. So, in the old days, how would you hear from the voice of your customer? You do member surveys. And member surveys have a role, they're very valuable, but what they don't tell you is the fact that your customers are deriving both a functional benefits, standard setting, information, networking and all of that. But increasingly, they're also getting social, emotional, psychological benefits. In our day and time of this time in our history, there's a huge erosion of trust in public institutions. Really, people are really struggling with what's happening in Washington and around the country. Associations are one of the principal centers of truth and stability and security for a lot of people.
How interesting you bring this up, Tom. Andrew and I are working on a white paper about the principles of trust in
Oh,
modern society and the roles that associations and
Mm-hmm.
nonprofits can play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
It's like you teed that up perfectly,
There we go.
Andrew.
Call me anytime.
Yeah, Q3 release. Big exciting news. Keep the secret. Don't tell anyone now.
Oh, that's great.
But
I read
very
that.
exciting.
Yeah. But the point which you make very well, Andrew, is the fact that it is a multidimensional experience being part of an
Mm.
association right now. And if you don't put experience first, then you're truly stuck in the past.
Yeah.
And so every interaction, I mean, we're getting involved with, staff training, how somebody greets somebody when they enter a space. How do you deal with people's imposter syndrome? How do you connect people and make them feel part of a community? Oftentimes we deal with members who may not have a college degree, so they enter already feeling a little disadvantaged. The association is there for personal validation.
Yeah. So I
So
have another brand question. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom. I didn't mean to interrupt.
the idea is that the needs are very complex, and being able to unpack them, I think, is really critical to understanding what your brand is.
Yeah.
So you need that information from your customers, from your stakeholders, maybe even your perspective or your former customers to understand what they're getting, how they perceive the brand, and what they may need or expect of it. We've jumped way beyond just a logo. We've jumped way beyond, a mission statement. What are the components? If you're looking at this, you're saying, "Hey, we haven't held the mirror up in a while. It's post-COVID. Our industry is being disrupted. We need to reevaluate our brand and our brand strategy." What are the components of that? Where do you start, assuming that you have some feedback from your membership? You've already asked the questions of your customers. What's next?
Yeah, there's two aspects. So we have a very defined process, and the idea is to get to your value prop, which a lot of associations really don't understand oftentimes. We do a full competitive analysis. We look at every association in their category, and we distill everybody to their unique selling propositions, their brand ideas. What is their core value proposition? Once you map out the category, you then can turn to the research of your membership. You do qualitative research, 1 hour interviews, coded, and it's a very in-depth study. And you're using different frameworks, jobs to be done to understand the practical needs of these members. You use brand relationship theory to unpack social, emotional, psychological needs. Once you do
Ooh,
that,
what's this? What is this?
so go ahead.
Brand emotion. What is, I've
So
never heard of this.
yeah, no, it's amazing. It's incredibly rich. A lot of people dated to the 90s when a guy named Max Blackstone wrote a book about brand relationships and how they were reciprocal. In other words, your relationship to your brand, think about the clothes you wear, think about the car you drive, is almost as complex as a human relationship. It has a reciprocity to it. It's complicated.
Yes.
The brand speaks to you. Now you because of all of that theoretical work, Susan Fournier is another major figure in here. You're able to use those frameworks to unpack the way that people really derive meaning from associations. And the idea is meaning. It really is. And so for those associations, being able to understand the functional all the way through to the deepest emotional needs is the way that you arrive at your real value proposition.
Yeah.
Once you get your value proposition, we go to what I call the minimum viable brand. And this is again pulling from Silicon Valley. It's like, don't try and get it all perfect.
Mm.
Get your brand in place with your ideal customer profile, your product service design, understand the product market fit and where it is that you are truly positioned to be really unique. And then, social proof and all of these things, but minimum viable brand, take it to market. Again, this is, people like Reid Hoffman talk about rapid prototyping. Get it out there so that you can get into that feedback loop with your customer. Market will talk back to you. At that point, you will continue to evolve and innovate the brand so that you are getting something that feels organic rather than trying to do this kind of top-down
Mhm.
broadcast type of approach to telling people what your association is about.
And I think so many associations are nervous of that approach because there's this assumption that we've got to get it out the door, we've got to get it right first time. If
Yep.
it's if we don't, they tell themselves a story that the membership will turn its back on us. And I would argue I think the memberships are more sophisticated than that. I think they want to I think they'd be more receptive to their membership body saying, look, engage with the feedback loop. We know it's not perfect. We're trying to develop something. We want to develop it in in collaboration and consultation, not, as you say, this top-down build it and they will come approach. Because and I think that nervousness is something we got to get over. We got to get past that, and we've got to be willing to take what we perceive as a risk. But actually, I think it's just a far more engaging way of business development, and I think that will ultimately yield far better return on the investment than I think organizations currently are.
Well, it's progress over perfection. You're
Indeed.
Yeah.
never going to have 100% of the data that you could need or want to make a decision, and something is never going to get perfect for every audience member
Mhm.
before you get it out there. I think associations are really struggling right now with the trying to
Yeah.
overplease
Yeah.
too many different groups, and there's a sensitivity that is paralyzing them. But tactical question for Tom: how often should you be doing this type of internal analysis, a brand review? I know when we do strategic planning with organizations, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, I don't want to take that on every time we do a new strategic plan.
Mhm.
That seems too I don't know, schizophrenic. How often should an organization be assessing and refreshing, if necessary, its brand elements?
Yeah, I mean, the real answer is, whenever there is some sort of disruptive change in the industry, is usually a good time to really take a look at what the unique selling proposition is. If the emergence of AI is completely reordering the way your industry is structured, eliminating entire classes of people or requiring upskilling or whatever it is, you really should do some deep research into what your membership wants. I'll give you a perfect example of this. One of the things that I think associations sit on, which is an absolute gold mine, is their knowledge. The amount of information capital they sit on, usually in a gated content in relatively obscure technical journals. One of the things that we've seen is associations starting to see that maybe you can ingest some of that information digitally and essentially create a subject matter expert that is there, kind of like ChatGPT, to answer incredibly technical questions about, that people may be searching for.
Mm.
That's a good example. The other example is online learning. Some of the research we've done, again, periodic membership research, has told us that they're not retaining information. The way that traditional webinars are structured, the way that these classrooms are run, these kind of taped lectures, isn't working for people as far as getting them to retain information. So we need modular learning, stackable learning, micro credentialing, AR, VR, branching scenarios, learner journeys,
Hmm.
all of the new pedagogical methods that are being used to help people learn and retain information.
Yeah.
Those are the things we should be deploying within association learning. And so, two examples, but you may not have gotten that intelligence 3 years ago, but the world evolves and
Yeah.
people get
Hmm.
much
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
cognizant and they're taking courses on Coursera, whatever it is, and suddenly everything starts to shift. So I would say I can't give you a number, Elisa, but I would say whenever there's disruption in the world, I think it's a really important thing to go back
Yeah.
and talk to the customer.
Well, Tom, we are definitely in sync. I mean, you are speaking our language. I mentioned white papers, and early last year, Andrew and I released a white paper about microlearning and how the brain has changed and consumption of information and how associations can be more relevant in their distribution of knowledge. So thanks for that soft plug. We'll attach that link to these show notes as well.
That's
Can
great.
I
But
can
go ahead.
I just ask? Do we not want to get to a point where, I mean, we talk about this when we're talking about strategic planning. We talk about actually strategies isn't really people like to talk about things in cycles because it's got a start and an end date, and they can contain, there's easy to understand parameters, and it becomes a much more digestible process for people to engage in. But do we not want to get to a point where actually we're not, if we're talking about experience, and we're talking about the multidimensional aspects of being a member and being a membership organization, surely we want to get to a point where our brand is continually evolving, and in the sense that and so that we're not ever coming up against these shock moments in our evolution, that our trajectory actually has an analysis and a continual analysis and continual assessment of our brand, so that it continues to evolve, and that we get to a point where we don't have to have these, something major has happened, therefore we need to go and completely look at our brand and overhaul it. Surely, is that not where we want to get to ultimately? Is that the brand is so integral to the success of the organization that if we're having to do a major overhaul, then there's something more fundamentally wrong with the business.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point you bring up, Andrew, because one of the places I think that's oftentimes untapped is the
Mm,
community. And I'm referring not only to the physical community, but also things like Higher Logic and some of the online communities.
mm,
Some of them sit on millions and millions of data points that they don't end up harvesting to look at what people are talking about.
Yeah.
mm.
And again, this is where AI could be incredibly helpful, is
Yeah.
how do you
Hmm.
start to actually mine that data
Yeah.
to understand how to do exactly what you're describing, that ongoing evolution of the organization. I think that to me is one of the places where you're going to find the answers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think back to our a recent podcast we did, Actions Speak Louder Than Surveys.
Yeah,
Our guest Rachel Mace talked about, where you can find some of the actual behavioral data. Your
yeah,
members are telling you things that you may not be listening to. or you may not be using for this kind of purpose.
Can I build on
Um,
that, Elisa, just very quickly? So we call this the paradox of self-reporting. It's the idea that people can't explain why they do the things they do. And so this is the problem with surveys is you're asking people to actually rationally go in and substantiate why they took a certain decision. And
Mm.
this is the reason we have things like ethnography for example, where a researcher sits in your office with you and watches you. And the idea
Wow.
being, if you ask that same person to report what they did, they give you a very different answer.
yeah.
And so I think what you're describing, the community is where you can do that observing. Essentially, that's ethnography. You'd sit there and you'd watch the actual interactions and you'd be able to understand what members are actually doing. Mm.
So this is where my right brain struggles here a little bit in that a lot of the things we're talking about, experiential, relational, qualitative, these are all very fluffy things. These are all things very hard to nail down and make a decision that is often going to require time, financial, human resources to be allocated to whatever's decided. This is malleable stuff. I mean, I guess you mentioned risk in the very beginning, but a brand is not a logo and not a website. So
Yep.
I'm still struggling to understand what we're really talking about here and how we really know what to make the change, how we know what the right answer for this brand or this value proposition
Yeah.
can be, because there has to be a multitude of segments within your membership. You're not going to have one value proposition. You're going to have one for early career, you're going to have one for certified, one for uncertified, one for this size company, this area of the country. I'm not trying to poke holes in this. I'm just trying to figure out how to wrap my brain around the next step of what to
Yep.
do and how to make this real.
I love that you asked that question because that's so important. So, yes, we have the brand, which is really, really understanding and unpacking what that experiential has, what is the experience of the organization. But ultimately, you've got to get to something tangible. And so all of that work is absolutely going to be translated by our agency or by many of the other wonderful agencies in the space into the logo, into the website, into the UI UX, and then ultimately into, it could be an account-based marketing strategy, a funnel as a service strategy, into programmatic ads, retargeting, all the rest of it. One of the things that we'll do at the very foundational level is write the vision, the mission, positioning statement, origin story, products and services. That becomes really important that everybody is aligned around what that is. Based on that, we do these things called micro narratives, which is essentially we write the story for each of your ideal customer profiles. So, for example, one of the associations we deal with has architects, construction people, and building facilities people, ownership and facilities. Very different needs. We have separate stories that are written about, for example, talking about the courses, talking about the value of membership, conferences, all of those things, we call them micro narratives. We'll write for each of those specific audiences. It may lead to a different landing page so that the architect can actually understand what is the ultimate value of attending this conference. What am I going to get? Well, I'm going to get information about new building products and new technologies that I can implement in my drawings. That's a good example. Those landing pages are high conversion landing pages. Those have calls to action that actually lead that architect into making the decision to purchase the course, purchase the registration, whatever it is. So those are the downstream effects of all of that early work that you're doing on the brand side will get expressed into very, very tangible things. My problem is that if you don't do the sort of 30,000-foot view of the organization, what you're going to end up with, and we've all experienced this, incredibly generic, speaking to no one,
Mm.
Yeah.
specific,
Mm.
not converting. Gee, I wonder why
Yeah.
30% of my members aren't members in 3 or 5 years. Like we get a lot of people coming into the funnel, but then once they become members, there's a huge gap in the experience. And so they drop off and we have a huge attrition rate. So all of this is part of what those downstream effects are really, really important. We get very tangible, very practical, and test, test, test. You've got to have KPIs and
Yeah.
you've got to be measuring in order to
Yeah.
understand what the ROI is. And that's
Yeah.
getting back to the website, which wasn't even mobile optimized
Yeah.
because, somebody didn't ask those fundamental questions.
Yeah. So I have one more question for you, and it may be the most controversial yet. Who should own this? Membership or marketing? Which department should own this process?
Wow. I was just literally on a game show format for Associate Forum. On one side of the stage, membership, on the other side, marketing. It was like the dating game. It was
Yeah.
hilarious. Um,
Family Feud. I think that may be more like Family Feud.
maybe yeah, and I stood right in the middle. And no, it's a really good question. The real answer here, Lisa, I think, is it's cross-functional. It's SWAT teams. It has to be because if you're going to be, unless you want to create silos within the organization,
Yeah.
you're going to have a kind of
Good answer.
cross-functional
Yes.
teams. But I think, and frankly, I think staff, one of the other things, and, I didn't mention is the second fundamental challenge of association branding is the fact that staff is so trying to keep their heads above water, doing
Hmm.
bottom of funnel
Hmm.
work, getting out membership newsletters, selling
Yeah.
courses, selling trade shows, whatever it is. They can't do any of the top of the funnel strategic stuff. In my opinion, that staff member needed to be there when that website contract was being signed. They needed to be informing the process with, like, guys, I don't know how the AMS is going to play with this system, or I'm not sure the community will even like the API will even work here, or the member experience is spread out across all of these disparate windows. All of these things, I think, require a real cross collaborative
Right.
team.
Right.
And so
With the
ultimately,
focus of the experience as the end game. No,
yes.
I love that. Tom, thank you so much
Yes,
for
thank you, Tom.
taking all the questions we fired at you today. I'm excited to download the challenges of association branding from your website. Thank you so much for making that available for free. I appreciate it,
My pleasure.
and we hope everyone else will check it out. This is not a challenge that's going to go away. You can't stick your head in the sand around branding or around your value proposition, your organizational identity. We could go in a lot of different directions. I actually want to have you back and talk about that competitive analysis. I
Sure.
don't think associations appreciate how much competition they're really facing in the
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit space, let alone Google and the for-profit space. So
I agree.
would love to have you back. But for now, thanks for your first visit to Association Transformation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you both. It was a complete pleasure.
Well, until next time, put your members and your mission first.